Vinyl, Polaroids, cassette tapes. They all have one thing in common. We don't need them. They all do basic tasks that everyone's phone can do, and yet people are still buying them and using them. I don't know if you noticed, but a lot of people seem to be abandoning their phones lately, or at least trying to limit their phone usage. And in its place, they're going back to older technology. And this is largely understandable. People know they have a dopamine addiction, so they set up ways to kind of get away from the addiction. And for some people, they go so far as to drop the usage of their phone entirely, or simply use technology that doesn't produce the level of dopamine addiction that a phone does. But I'll talk more about how the dopamine addiction ties into this later. Here's one of the first reasons I think people are stuck going back to older technology. That is a Latin phrase which means to touch on the matter of touch. I remember when millennials, my generation, started to go back to analog versions of technology, like vinyl. But I've even seen people switch to using cassette tapes for their audio entertainment. Then you have those that journal in a notebook rather than a note-taking app. Some of this is related to a tactile experience. Pushing physical buttons, writing with a pen and a paper. These tactile experiences probably activate a different part of your brain because you're physically touching something besides glass. If you think about it, no matter what app you're using, no matter what site you're browsing, every piece of content you consume is just glass. Even if you have a computer, you've got a keyboard you can actually type on and feel something move while you're interacting with the computer. If you've seen any wedding videos lately, high-end wedding videographers will now offer a Super 8 film package, which is where they'll take a Super 8 camera and record portions of the wedding. The Super 8 camera was made like 60 years ago. It is terribly low quality, and it's really hard to know if the thing that you shot looks okay. Sometimes it has weird artifacts. And as a result, it's just hard to see anything that was shot on a Super 8 camera. It's like, why didn't you just grab an old Nokia phone from the thrift store and have your dad shoot the wedding on that? The funny thing is that then people will digitize that footage shot on Super 8 and edit it so they can post it on Instagram. Now you're using a high-end glossy OLED display to watch grainy and blurry footage that was designed for a 1960s projector. You know, Instagram has filters that can make it look just as bad, right? Why are we doing this? I suspect a large part of it is simply the feeling that the footage gives people. People don't normally pay for wedding videos so that they can get a detailed crime scene analysis. They do it so they can have memories that they can go back and watch and get nostalgic feelings from. And I think that this is yet another reason behind the sudden interest in older technology. We're at the point where phones are good enough for people to make movies on. People have already made movies on iPhones. And it's almost like there's a strong desire to want to be different and shoot things differently. But I think there's another reason going on here, and it has to do with the dopamine addiction. It's a theory. J.R.R. Tolkien did not intend The Lord of the Rings to be an allegory. But, let's be real, it does speak to some universal truths about power and temptation. It's universally true that once you've tasted an ultimate power, it's really hard to give it up. And you fairly quickly become obsessed with it. So here's my theory. If you think about all the addictions that have existed across history, phones were not the first thing. There was a time at which people said, shouldn't keep your nose stuck in a book. That was even said by a guy who lived in the year like 160. His name was Marcus Aurelius. He said, throw away your books. Stop letting yourself be distracted. That is not allowed. And he went on to say, stop allowing your mind to be a slave, to be jerked about by selfish impulses. Seems to be signals that dopamine addiction to information types of content have existed forever. Definitely before phones, but even before modern books were invented. So a guy who lived almost 2,000 years ago was struggling with an addiction to consuming information. So this seemed to me, at least, like the infinite scroll is nothing new. Yeah, technically the action of scrolling your thumb across your glass screen, that's new. But what isn't new is being obsessed with dumping information into your mind. That's not new. So picture yourself 100 years ago. No, let's say 500 years ago. But let's just say you entertained yourself in the exact same way as you do today. So you're sitting in your chair in front of a big open area, like a courtyard. Every 60 seconds, you snap your fingers as if it was a thumb scroll, and the next show comes on to play in front of you. A dog comes up and does some trick, and then you laugh, and the next thing, you snap your fingers, and then a comedian comes up in front of you and tells you some jokes, and you laugh. Okay, so you've got this scenario in your mind. Now think about who you would have to be that person. You would have to be like the most powerful person in a country or an empire to have that much power. Servants at every beck and call. Instead of Googling, you snapped your fingers and said, "Bring my wise men out, I have a question for them." This is the level of power we're talking about, that every person has right now in their pockets. And you can imagine an emperor like that probably doesn't have any new lands to conquer. They don't have any new ambitions that they need to achieve. There's nowhere else in the hierarchy for them to move up. All they can do is consume more and more and more. And if you're in that position, nothing new to conquer, nothing new to build, everything is yours already, you'd probably find yourself increasingly more depressed. Does that remind you of anybody else? So that's where we are. We're at a place in society where everybody has that power. You know, it's virtual power. You know, we don't actually have control over other humans, at least most of us don't. It's no wonder that we have kind of a mental health crisis. Like, nobody has anywhere to go to get more entertainment than they already get. As a result, I think a lot of people have realized that they would be better off if they locked up this power, so that they're forced to go explore life outside of this cage. Create a scarcity of power so that they have something to go out and achieve. And so in a way, this tool that provided unlimited power to most everybody in society has become a dead end. Where am I going with all this? I think the lesson that I've learned is I need to be more like a hobbit. You'll remember that Frodo struggles with carrying the ring all the way to Mordor. But as he gets closer and closer to Mordor, his desire to put it on and take control of it gets stronger and stronger. Even gets into little fights with Sam at the end of the book and becomes extremely defensive of the ring. As you know, eventually, Frodo does take it for his own. So why would I say, be more like a hobbit? What many people don't know is that in the book, Sam was also a ring bearer for a little bit. The book says that he felt himself enlarged, as if he were robed in a huge, distorted shadow of himself. A vast and ominous threat halted upon the walls of Mordor. He felt that he had, from now on, only two choices: to forbear the ring, though it would torment him, or to claim it, and challenge the power that sat in its dark hold beyond the Valley of the Shadows. Already the ring tempted him, gnawing at his will and reason. Wild fantasies arose in his mind, and he saw Samwise the Strong, hero of the age, striding with a flaming sword across the darkened land, and armies flocking to his call as he marched to the overthrow of Barad-dûr. And then all the clouds rolled away, and the white sun shone, and at his command the Vale of Gorgoroth became garden of flowers and trees and brought forth fruit. And he had only to put on the ring and claim it for his own, and all this could be. In that hour of trial, it was the love of his master that helped him most to hold firm. But also deep down in him lived still unconquered his plain hobbit sense. He knew in the core of his heart that he was not large enough to bear such a burden, even if such visions were not a mere cheat to betray him. The one small garden of a free gardener was all his need and due, not a garden swollen to a realm, his own hands to use, not the hands of others to command. And I'm becoming more and more convinced that when it comes to conquering a power like this, the ideal I should be striving for is to be like Samwise Gamgee. I'm just a guy. I don't need to call up a constant stream of entertainment. If I get too attached to it, the power will actually conquer me. What I really need is to take care of my own little garden. Subscribe if you enjoyed.